Well, hey, good evening, Life Point. Pastor Scott here, actually coming to you from my backyard, out on my deck, and just enjoying a absolutely beautiful, beautiful day. And with the surgery that I just went through, I get really tired really, really fast, and so I've been trying to take it easy and just work half a days, and then I'll come home and try to recuperate. And plus, we've been having training in the evenings, and so I just felt like it's such a beautiful day. I want to do our Bible study, just out here enjoying nature and just the beauty of the cooler weather and the leaves that are falling. I'm looking around my backyard right now and just see the leaves as they're starting to change, and some of them are starting to fall, and just a beautiful, beautiful day. And so I want to talk to us tonight for our Bible study. I really want to expound on what Pastor Lyons preached about in his second service this last Sunday. He talked about the story of David when David was just a boy, and Pastor Lyons preached this week of how that we can have courage, and that courage in Christ, that we know that He's there with us, He's there beside us, that we have that ability to be encouraged, to know that He's fighting our battles for us. It's not about it's not even about all the tools that we have. It's not about all the gifts in which that we have. It's not about all those things, but it's whether you have God on your side or not. And so I want to expound on that tonight, if you will. So turn with me. We're going to be in 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. We're going to be in chapter 17. And just as Pastor Lyons did Sunday, he gave a little bit of the backdrop of the story of King David, and just kind of refresh our memory of where we're at and where we're at in this particular story. David had been anointed king, and he had been anointed to eventually take over kingship one day. He was the most unlikely candidate. In fact, he was just a ruddy boy. He said he had a great complexion. He was a handsome young man, but he was just a kind of a snotty-nosed little kid for the most part. And we get to this point of the story where his father Jesse sends David to the battlefield, which is where his brothers were that were in battle with the current king, King Saul. And so as David was instructed by his dad to take his brothers some crackers and some cheese, and just to go and help replenish them physically from food. And when David arrives on scene, and that's where we're going to be at tonight, right here in this particular part of the story. When David arrives on scene, he arrives on scene with this massive giant of a man, Goliath, on kind of standing in a valley. And as Pastor Lyons even said Sunday, there was two mountains, one on each side, and the Israelite army. I mean, they were they were a great and very powerful army, but they were going against the Philistines, which were brutal. They were a brutal army. They were massive. They were well trained, and this one gentleman, he was the warrior above all warriors. I mean, he was a decorated soldier. He was well known in the area for being this massive man, of killing hundreds, if not thousands, of people by his own hand. And when David arrives on scene, he arrives on scene with Goliath standing there in the valley, yelling across the valley over to the army of Israel. And really, he's slashing them. I mean, he's just trashing them and calling them, sissies. And I mean, obviously I'm paraphrasing of scripture, maybe even adding a little to it, but I mean, he's just calling them out. And David arrives on scene And the Israelite army, they're hiding. And not only are they hiding, but I mean they're literally afraid. They're scared. Now, I want to share something with you that has kind of taken place up to this point. King Saul was chosen. He was a man chosen by God to be king, but King Saul began to allow that to go to his head, and he began to do things outside of the will of God, and God eventually pulls his hand from King Saul. But one of the things that God had done for Israel and for the army of Israel is that God had told them, as long as you obey me, as long as you continue to serve me, only me, you have nothing to fear. Now, I want you to hang on to that, okay? That's going to be key for tonight. God tells us, says, listen, as long as I'm your God, as long as you're my people, you have nothing to fear. You have no man to fear. You have no army to fear. You have no giant to fear in your life. And here David walks on scene, and the army of God is hiding behind bushes and rocks and trembling in their armor. They're afraid. They're scared to come out. They're scared to show their face. What if this giant attacks us? I mean, this guy could wipe us all out. I mean, they're scared. And David, this, probably somewhere between the ages, the age of 15 and 17 years old, arrives on scene, a ruddy shepherd boy. And I don't want to get into all the shepherd boy, but David as a shepherd boy is, he's pretty much considered the lowest of low, kind of in the ranks of the family, or kind of the ranks even of society if you're a shepherd boy, because you pretty much do all the nasty, dirty work. And David shows up and he sees this. And it doesn't necessarily say this in Scripture. But I could imagine David being greatly discouraged. I mean, think about this for a moment. You're a young man. You've grown up in a home, a God-fearing home. I mean, Jesse was a God-fearing man. He raised his boys to be God-fearing men. And when David arrives on scene, and he sees his brothers and the rest of God's army cowered down behind bushes and rocks and trees. Did you imagine the disappointment that went into his heart? I mean, if you think about this, have you ever had a hero, or you had somebody, man, you held them at a really high esteem, and I mean, you had them built up that they were, man, maybe they were perfect for you, or maybe they were, that person that could never do any wrong, and one day, man, they just let you down. They just disappoint you. Take that emotion and understand the feeling that David had as David kind of arrives on scene here for this. That this is the emotions in which that he's having. And so here in chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, and we're gonna jump through here, and it says here in verse 1, it says, the Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Socoh in Judah and Azekah at Ephes-dammim, and Saul countered by gathering the Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and the Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. And so that's the story I just kind of laid out before you. And it says, and then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistines' rank to face the forces of Israel. So, I mean, I want you to kind of understand exactly what's going on. I mean, Goliath steps out of the ranks of his army. I mean, they have an army themselves. Philistines do. But Goliath steps out ahead of the entire army of the Philistines, willing and ready to take on the entire army of Israel. That's a bad man. I mean, that's a powerful man. That's a man that's very secure in his ability to fight as a warrior. Okay? And so it says that he steps out, and it tells us here, he was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet and bronze coat. It tells us it weighed about 125 pounds. He wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. It says, and the shaft of his spear was as heavy as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed over 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. And I don't want to get into an armor bearer. Armor bearer was one that, just for all simple and quick reference, literally walked in front of the warrior to take the first shot. I mean, that's what he was. And so we get here in verse 12. So we're going to skip a few, and that's just where Goliath is standing there in the valley, and he's yelling across the valley, and he's hollering insults over at the army of Israel. Come out and face me. If you defeat me, then I'll give, he's laying out all of all the rules and regulations. If you beat me, then you get all of this. But if I beat you, you become our slaves. You become underneath us, and we will rule over you. And so we jump down in verse 12, and it says, and now David, the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephrathite, from Bethlehem in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at that time, and he had 8 sons. If you remember, he had 8 sons. 7 of them stood before Samuel, and God said, nope, none of them. And so they called for David. David was out with the sheep, and he calls David in. David comes in. He's a ruddy little boy, probably around the age of 12, 13 years old. God says, that's the one. And Samuel says, God, you've got 7 men that are already ready for battle, warrior, that they could be great leaders, and you got this little boy. That's one. And God tells Samuel, says, Samuel, it's not what I don't see the things that man sees. I don't see the things that's on the outside. I see what's on the inside. I see the heart of man. And so he knew that David was courageous. He knew David was loyal. He knew David would one day be a great leader, a great friend. And so God knew those things. Samuel did not. All Samuel saw was that he was a boy. And so here we're going to jump down a few more verses. And it says in verse 20, let's go to verse 24, and we'll catch it to where David kind of arrives on the scene with the army. And it says, as soon as the Israelites saw him, they began to run away in fright, talking about Goliath. And it says, have you seen that giant? So the entire armies, they're going around, dude, have you seen that guy? Have you seen how big he is? You see how bad he is? I mean, look at his armor. I mean, he is just, man, there's no way. I mean, they're going, I mean, this is kind of how they're talking, and you could just imagine the army is they're scared to death. And it says, and he comes out each day to defile Israel, and the king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. And he will give that man one of his daughters for his wife. And the man's entire family will be exempted from paying taxes. And Pastor Lyon's exempted on this. He says, check this out, man. You get freedom. You don't ever have to pay taxes again, and you get the girl. I mean, this is like the fairy tale story, right? And this is what the king offers to Saul offers to all of the army of Israel. Anyone that kills this man, this is what happens. And so David now arrives on scene, verse 26. And it says, so here David asked the soldiers that were standing nearby, What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he is allowed to defy the armies of the living God? David has a question. When David arrives on scene, he asks a couple of questions. First of all, there's soldiers that are around. David says, so if you kill this guy, what do you get? And so they're telling him, like, man, you get the girl, you get freedom, you get money. I mean, all that kind of stuff. And David then asks the second question: who is this guy? Who does he think he is? That he could stand there in the valley and defile my God? Who is this man that stands in the valley and dishonors and defies the people of God, the army of God? Who does he think he is? I want you to understand the mindset of David versus the mindset of the army of Israel at this point. Now, I want you to know, David had seen some things as a young boy. David had gone through some things as a young boy. But I want to tell you, probably every one of these men that were in this battle had been in battles before. They had seen bloodshed. They had probably shed blood themselves. And so they knew what it took to fight. And I'm not making excuses for them by no means, but here's what I want us to see is that when David arrives on, he sees all of these men that are shaking in their armor. They're scared. They don't even care that this giant of a man is defiling their God. They don't even care that this man is defiling the army of God. The army of God reminds you that God had promised that if they remained faithful to Him, that He would remain faithful to them, and that nothing should ever stand in their way. And they don't care. That doesn't mean anything to them. However, David arrives on scene, and he's like, no, we're not putting up with that. I mean, who is this guy? Why does he think that he could even do this? And so David's mindset was, I'm not putting up with this. Y'all may put up with it. Y'all may sit over here and be silent. And I hope you hear me. Y'all may want to stay over here and be silent, but I will not be. Y'all may want to sit over here and not do anything, but I won't. You know what? You may not draw your sword, but I will. You may not fight, but I will. And David then says this in verse 28. It says, but when David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he got angry. If you've got an older brother, I have an older brother, only sibling that I have. I have an older brother. My older brother, when we were in school, when we were living together at home, man, we really disliked each other. I mean, we fought all the time. I mean, all the time. And he's a big guy. I mean, I know I'm a big guy. My brother's big, and always has been so much bigger than me, and picked on me. And I'm not giving a sob story, but he always picked. But there's been many of those times in my life that my brother had friends over, or we were in the presence of some of my brother's friends, and I would say something, and my brother would just get so mad because it would either embarrass him or whatever it may be, and he would just get embarrassed, and he would just like, dude, shut up, stop, man, go away. You don't even know what you're talking about. You're just a little kid, right? And so this is kind of that setting, and so. It says when he heard David talking to the other men, it says he got angry. He says, why are you even here? Go away. Why are you here? And he demanded, he says, what about those those sheep, and you're supposed to be taken care of. I know your pride, and I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see battle. And you know what, David may have always talked about, man, I want to be like my brothers, and I want to do this, and I want to be in battle, and I want to be a warrior. I mean, there may have been times that, growing up and stuff, I mean, he may have said that. And so his brother is just trying to put him down. He's like, dude, why are you even here? Aren't you supposed to be taking care of the animals? I mean, yes. What'd you do? Did you tell Dad you were going to go somewhere, and you show up here just so you can see battle? Why are you even here? And so then David pretty much tells him, he's like, dude, listen, Dad sent me here. And he says in verse 29, he says, what have I done now? And David replied, says, I was only asking a question. And he walked over to some of the others, and he asked them the same thing, receiving the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and the king sent for him. He says, don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. Now, you would think that was fixing to happen the other way, that you would say, don't worry about that Philistine, King Saul said to David. But it's not how it reads. It says, don't worry about this Philistine, said David to the king. This teenage boy, I got a 16-year-old. I remember what it was like when I was 6. Yeah, there were times, man, I thought I was 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And David here comes to the king. First of all, I couldn't imagine even being in the presence of the king like that. And he's standing there. He's like, you know what? Hey, king, don't you worry about it. I got this. You leave this up to me. I got it. And so here I want you to see what David says. And it says, and David told Saul, I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you could fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy. He's a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats. And so David tells this story to the king. So let me kind of just short story this for you for a second. So the king tells David, he says, listen, you're just a kid. You're full of hormones. Man, this guy, he's a decorated warrior. He's been fighting in wars before you were ever born, buddy. And so David says, let me tell you something, king. I've been taking care of my dad's flock. And I was out in a field, and part of his responsibility as a shepherd is to protect the sheep, protect the herd. And so David said, you know what, king? So I'm out in the field. I'm by myself with my herd. And when a lion came, I wrestled that lion and I tore him apart. Oh, and also when I was watching my father's herd, and a bear came, yeah, I took care of him too. I killed him with my bare hands. So this uncircumcised, this pagan Philistine, man, he ain't nothing compared to them. He's nothing compared to them. And so David's telling this story to the king. I mean, just think about the gall that David has as he's standing here before the king and he's talking like this. And I want you to look at what David says in verse 36. He says, I've done this both lion and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too. For he has defiled, and listen to the attitude, he has defiled the armies of God. Verse 37, I want you to hear how David says this to the king, and I want you to understand the message in which David is speaking to the king. I want you to hear the message that he says. In verse 37, it says, and the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and bear will rescue me from this Philistine. I want you to see where David's hope is. I want you to understand where David's hope is. David's not relying on his strength. He's not relying on even his ability to use weapons, or, yes, he's saying, I've done this with a lion, I've done it with a bear, I can do it to him as well. But he doesn't give himself credit. He's like, you know what? I'm so strong. I'm so big. I'm so bad. Listen, I ripped them apart. He says, no. He says, listen, God gave me the ability to take care of a lion. God gave me the ability to take care of this bear, and God will give me the ability to take care of this Philistine. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Listen to the attitude. Listen to the mentality. Listen to the courage that's there. And 38. And but David persisted. He says, and I've been taking care of my father's. Oh, sorry, I jumped up verses. 38, I'm sorry. And it says, then Saul gave David some of his own armor. And we're even going to jump down a little farther than that, I'm sorry. So Saul tried to give David his armor. It was too big. He couldn't move. And so it says in verse 39, and the second part of verse 39, he says, I can't go in these, talking about the armor of Saul. He says, in fact, I'm not going to use them. And so David took them off again. And this is what David did. David reached down as shepherds did. Shepherds had usually a shepherd's staff or rod that they would use to help fight off animals, that they would help keep the sheep in line, those kind of things. They would help gather the sheep, and most of them had like a hook on it, and they would have things like that. But they also had other weapons, a slingshot. Now, it's not like a slingshot like you and I are familiar with the rubber band and the handle you pull out. They had a slingshot. It was a leather strap. It had two leather straps that came off of it. Usually, one of the straps would either wrap around the wrist, or it would wrap around a couple of their fingers, while the other strap was free. And what they would do is in this pouch, this leather pouch, usually a round or square little pouch, and they would put a stone in there, and they would fold it up and take that other string in their hand, and then they would hurl it around, and then they would let go of the one string while the other one was still attached to them, slinging the rock. Now, I haven't actually ever tried that. I've used a modern slingshot, but I've never tried one of those. But I could imagine the accuracy that you would have to have with something like that. I could imagine the practice that would go in. But this is what David had. It didn't tell us anything about him carrying his shepherd's staff. It doesn't tell us about it. All it says is that he reaches down into the brook. There's a little brook, a little stream that's running by. David reaches down. He picks up 5 stones. He puts them in his pouch. And David takes off. You've heard me say this before. I'm one of those people that I love to put myself in the story. I want to feel the emotion. It helps the story kind of come alive to me. And so I want to put myself in that position for just a moment, because I want to try as much as possible to feel the emotions, to feel the just the rush of adrenaline, to feel the fear that's just coursing through his veins. And so just a moment for me. I want to ask you, do that for just a moment. I want you to close your eyes for just a second. And I want you, with your eyes closed, I want you for just a second, I want you to do this. I want you to picture your greatest fear. Something that you're greatly scared of. For me, it's snakes. For you, it may be spiders. It may be drowning. It may be, I don't know. We all have different, just different fears. Once you have that in your mind, I want you to do this. I want you to picture yourself facing that fear head on. I want you to picture yourself. I'm gonna face this fear head on. I'm going after it. Scared or not scared, I'm going towards it. I'm going after it. Now, if you're like me, when I tried this, just in that, you can open your eyes now, just in that just brief second, in that short illustration, how many of your heart rate just kind of just climbed a little bit? How many of you kind of just, you felt just a little bit of an adrenaline rush? You kind of, just for a moment, you were just like, maybe you kind of started breathing a little heavy, just in that moment. Think about David, this teenage boy, going after probably one of the greatest warriors in his time, with nothing but a rock and a leather strap. But I want you to know where David's security lied. His security was not in that stone. His security was not in his slingshot. His security was not even in his ability that he has defeated a bear and a lion at one time. His security was in God and God alone. That was where his security was. There was nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. I want you to read what David says, and because this is probably the most key to the story. And here it says that, reaching into his shepherd's bag after he'd picked up the stones, taking out a stone from his bag, he hurled it with his sling. And it says that he hit the Philistine in his forehead. The stone sank in to his head, in other words, crushing his skull. And Goliath stumbled and he fell face down on the ground. It says that David triumphed over the giant. David takes the sword of the giant, he cuts off his head, and he bags it up and he brings it back to the king, and they bring it back to Israel. As David is going after Goliath, David has this mentality that nobody is going to mess with my God. Nobody is going to tell me how I can and can't live this life. Nobody's going to tell me who I have to serve and who I can't serve. David says, nobody's going to speak ill about my God. Nobody is going to make fun of my God and make fun of God's people. David stands and he says, and you're not going to take my right away to serve my God, and I'll die trying to defend it. How many of you will do that? How many of you have that mentality? How many of you have that fight? How many of you have that will, that desire to even go that far? Let me put it on maybe a little more modern day example for us. Say in the next year or two, we come to a place in our nation where we're beginning, the church is beginning to become squeezed. It's becoming persecuted. In our own nation, we are beginning to be asked to where we can't serve as freely as we do right now, or we're being forced to not worship, or we're being forced to not speak about God in public places, or we're being forced to not have the freedoms in which that we have in our belief as Christians. And we're talking about a powerful government. And you're talking about lowly me. What could I do? I'm not anybody special. Pastor, you may be watching this tonight and you may just kind of say, preacher, I'm retired. I don't have any political power. Preacher, I've worked a 9-to-5 job all my life and getting to the place where I could retire, and man, I don't want to have to worry about any fights or I don't have to worry about that say, I just want to enjoy life. Or maybe you say, you know what, preacher, I can do that on my own. I mean, I can do that from home. I don't have to do that in a private place. I don't have to go to a church building. I don't have to go somewhere else to do that. I mean, I can do that in my own heart. I can do that, and all those things may be true. All those things may be how you feel. But that's not even the question that I'm asking. The question I'm asking is, are you willing to fight for your faith? Are you willing to fight, put your life on the line, put your family on the line, put everything you know on the line for your God, for your freedoms to worship, for your ability to serve a living God? I mean, I know most of us probably can't answer that question truthfully because we're not in that circumstance, but I want to tell you that, what stand are you making? What stand are you making right now that could change that scenario I just gave you in a year or two? What fight are you fighting right now that could change the course of our future, of our ability to serve a living God? What fight are you fighting right now? It says, I believe in a God that saved me. I believe in a God that created this world. I believe in a God that loves every man and boy and girl across this globe. And I'm willing to fight to share that freedom and that love of a God that created us, despite what everyone else tells me I should be doing or shouldn't be doing. How many of us have that mentality of David that says, you know what, y'all can sit over here and do nothing. You can sit over here and be silent. You can hold your weapons and look good holding it. And you can wear all the armor that you want. Remember David talking to the other soldiers that were standing there, right? And, you could be that one that just said, that's sitting there and, you've got all your armor on and you've got a sword, you've got a shield. Man, you look like a warrior. But you crouch behind a tree or a bush or a rock, not willing to use the tools that God has given you and the promise in which that He's given you. You can sit there and you can be that individual that has seen bloodshed and they've seen battle. And they have used their weapons in the past. And they've used their weapons maybe even recently, but you know what? There's something that's standing before you right now that's just got you scared. And so you got your sword sheathed. You got your helmet between your legs, curled up in a fetal position behind a tree. While the world stands in the valley, hurling insults at the church and hurling insults at God and His people, at you, mocking you and mocking God and mocking Christianity, mocking our faith. And we're just silent, sitting back, shaking in our armor. Or we could be David. Have no clue what lies ahead. Have no real training. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Have no real massive weapons. But you just say, all I need is God on my side. And as long as God is on my side, I'm a victor. And I've said, I don't know why, but all week long, that sermon Pastor Lyons preached on Sunday has kind of led me to that point of that thought process. Man, am I like David? Or am I like the rest of the Israelite army? Am I the one that's being silent? Am I the one that's cowered down in the fetal position? Am I the one that's angry? If you remember, Eliaz, David's brother, am I the one that's angry at the ones that are wanting to be like David? Am I the one that's sitting on the sideline going, why do you want to do this? Why are you even here? And you're battling your own people for fighting a cause. I don't know. I've just that mindset has been with me all week long. And so, man, tonight when I was getting ready to do a Bible study, this is just the direction that God led me to go with it, is that I want you to expound. I want you to share what I've laid on your heart all week. So I leave you with this question. Who are you? Are you like the other soldiers of the army of Israel? You may have seen some battle. You may have seen some bloodshed. You may have seen some wars. Right now you've gotten cowered down. You're scared about something. You don't have that God faith that you had. Maybe you've forgotten the promise of God. Maybe it's slipped your mind. Maybe it's, man, I know God says this, but man, I don't know. And that's not faith. That's not trust. Or are you like David? And only you can answer those questions. And I thank you guys for joining me today. Man, I've enjoyed doing my lesson out here with you guys. Just enjoying, man, the beauty of the trees and the leaves. And so I'm glad we had an opportunity to get together tonight. I just want to say thank you for everything that you do for me, everything you do in our church, everything you do for our Creator God. And I want you guys to know just how much I love you. And I pray that we stay strong, and I pray we continue to fight the good fight, that we will continue to run that race. And man, I want to encourage you guys with that so much. And a couple of announcements, and I want to pray for us and we'll leave. A couple of announcements is don't forget about our Zoom groups. We've been going through training all week long. In fact, tomorrow night we have our last scheduled training with ones that will be using laptops and Windows computers. And so we want to invite you to come be a part of that at 6 o'clock if you're using one of those type of devices. If you have not made one of our other meetings that we've had with Apple and that we've had, our facilitators have already met, if you've got an Android device as well, and you're like, I hadn't been able to make any of those, go ahead and come on Thursday, and we'll accommodate you if you need to come then. That works best for you. Please come. We don't want you to miss out. There's a lot of information that we need to give you, and so we want to see you. We're social distancing. They're in the fellowship hall at the church, and so you can wear your mask in. Once you get to your seat, you can take it off. And there's we're sanitizing all the stations and those things. So please know and feel free in that, and that you don't have any of that to fear, as well as we're doing our best to try to take care of you guys. And the next one is this. is our trunk or treat. Elena Brookshires is organizing all of that. She's doing a fantastic job with all of that. You can get on our website, our church app, and there's a sign-up form on a volunteer sign-up form on our website and on our church app. And so you can go there and fill that out. There's several different questions that it's going to ask you, and you fill that out. And when you submit that, it's going to come straight to me. It's going to go to Brian. It's also going to go to Elena, so we'll have record of who's willing to help and how you're willing to help. Guys, I love you, and I thank you again for being here. Let me pray for you really quick, and then I will see you guys on Sunday, all right? Hey, God, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your grace. I thank you for your mercy. Father, I thank you that just sitting out here amongst nature, Father, the breeze that's just coming through right now and just blowing across my face. Wow, Father, it just feels like your breath breathing on me. And such a beautiful, beautiful picture. Father, just so amazing that you are. So wonderful that you are. I thank you for my church. God, I thank you for my people and how much that, God, they love me and how much they love you. Father, I thank you so much. And God, and I pray that you would prepare our hearts even now for what you're going to do on Sunday, because I'm anticipating amazing and great things. We love you. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Guys, I pray you have a great rest of the week, and I will see you on Sunday.